Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Israel Connection. I'm Esti Zenati, and I have a very special guest today, straight from Israel. Adeena Sussman is a New York Times best-selling author, known for her own cookbooks, Shabbat Recipes and Rituals from My Table to Yours, and Sababa. She is also the co-author of 15 cookbooks, including Chrissy Teigen's best-selling Craving series. Adeena has spent nearly 20 years writing about Israel's food culture and now lives, cooks, and writes in Tel Aviv, where she lives in the shadow of the city's Carmel market with her husband, Jay Shofet. Adeena, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So Adeena, what was the turning point that made you realize food was your professional path?
I was working in Israel actually in my 20s in television. But I realized anytime I took a trip, like all I was writing home about was the food, emails to friends. And also my first time discovering cooking from a market or a shuk and cooking seasonally, and really connecting to Israeli food as a part of my Jewish identity and my increasing connection to Israel. So I think those 4 years after college really sort of put me on the path to a food career. And then I moved to New York in 1997 and eventually found my way to Gourmet Magazine, where I worked before I went to culinary school. So I would say it was those first 4 years. And also my childhood, I wouldn't say is a career path, but I grew up in a food loving home where we did a lot of Shabbat entertaining and cooking because we were kosher in an area where there weren't a lot of other kosher people. So we had tons of guests every Shabbat. We made everything from scratch, from soup to nuts, literally.
Wow. What is the process like of writing a cookbook? Because, we know about people writing novels and things like that, but a cookbook is very different. So what is that process like? And what is the difference between writing your own book rather than co-authoring a book?
Interestingly, I think there are actually a lot of similarities between a good cookbook and a good novel. I think both of them have a narrative arc. And I think the cookbooks that people tend to turn to again and again don't just have good recipes, because we know you can find recipes online now and from different sources. It's really the story and the person behind the recipes and, the world that they're bringing you into and compelling you to follow and share is what I think keeps people going. And, my books like Sababa was the story of my absorption, my klita into Israeli culture through the lens of food, and using the shuk as a big character, actually, and all the people that I met and the stories that I got to tell. And Shabbat was the story of my, Shabbat cooking around the world, and it ended up being a real deep dive into my own childhood and almost a memoir. I realized I had to go deep into my own memories and before I could sort of expand larger. So, I think good novels or memoirs have a lot and similar to cookbooks, but the technical part of writing a cookbook is a lot of food shopping, food prepping, recipe developing, writing things down, retesting it again and again, and tons of dishwashing.
I bet.
And, inspiration can come from a variety of sources. I can say I need to fill in my soup chapter, or I can say I met an amazing person this week when I was traveling within Israel, and they come from an interesting, ethnic background, and I want to cook with them and have them teach me a recipe. I let recipes and food sort of lead me and guide me in cookbook writing, and then I tend to write the text and the introduction later. I always say cook first and write later. And it's both a very technical process and a very creative process together. And also it's very organizational. You have to really be on top of the status of all the recipes and so many edits and corrections. There's so much that can go wrong, on the written page with the recipes. So yeah, but it's a really interesting process.
It's interesting. I remember the old cookbooks my mom used to have at home. They were mostly the recipes, and there was a little short, little description, I guess, about the recipe. It was never, as far as I remember, it wasn't a story about the life story of the author.
Right.
It feels like it evolved a lot since then.
I think so. I think, in the age of social media, people expose themselves much more and share more of their personal stories and personalities. And I also think that, the story and the narrative are a way to distinguish among, just the massive amount of cookbooks that are written now,
Mhm.
and really like, creating your own little corner of the cooking world, which is something that I've really tried to do. And you asked about the difference between writing and co-writing. When you're co-authoring a book, you're trying to really assume the culinary and literary identity of someone else. Like, your job is to really assume their voice, get into their cooking brain and their life brain and writing. And it's a really satisfying process for me. Writing my own books was something that came out of my move to Israel when I met my husband and, found myself living in Israel, but I was co-authoring cookbooks and loving it. And I found the challenge of, nailing someone else's voice, both in the kitchen and on the page, was like something that I'd love to do. I'm a bit of a people pleaser, and I'm also like, I love to collaborate and like help someone else bring their vision to life. But so writing my own books was the process was stepping out. Like, the great thing about writing someone else's book is once the book is written, it's theirs to promote and stand in front of. And I was behind the scenes. And once you write your own book, like, you really have to stand behind every page and every thought and every recipe, and step out of the shadows. And you're responsible for raising this baby, basically.
Yeah, your baby. Yeah.
My baby, and I'm not a handmaid anymore. I'm the mother.
Yes. So how do you come up with the recipes? Because I've been following you on social media, and I've seen all the amazing things that you cook, and it always looks so good. And I wish I could smell it, through the screen.
Yeah.
So what is that process like?
It's a lot of it is based on what's seasonal in the shuk. I walk in the shuk. I talk with different people about what they're cooking. I eat at restaurants. In Israel, especially, the food scene is amazing and it really inspires me. I try and focus on I'm not very into like internet trend recipes or TikTok type recipes. I try and create what I call forever recipes, like things that people are really going to make and turn to again and again, even if it's on social media and not in a cookbook. And yeah, I'd say it's really inspired by seasonality, locality, and also like the Jewish holiday calendar a lot of the time, like what's coming up. Last year I had a sheet pan latke that went viral. You never know what's going to like resonate with people and why. You could think you have great ideas and they can land in some kind of an internet echo chamber, and then you could post something that you feel is maybe less compelling or original, and then people go bonkers for it. And that's both the delightful and maddening thing about social media.
Yeah, I guess you release things based on your taste. You think this is like a really good thing, and sometimes we don't know what the people out there look for.
And also, I think the internet is a very democratic place. I mean, if your content is getting the same amount of views as other people's, like, it's actually very, I wouldn't say humbling, but very truthful. Like, I can have an idea that I think is great. And that happens in my cookbooks as well. I send all my recipes out to multiple home testers and professional tester to pay them to test the recipes. And, I could be really jazzed in an idea, but if 2 of the 3 people come back and be like, it's just okay, like, I'm not putting that in my book. Like, I'm trusting the process, and, I cook for you, not for me. Ultimately, the idea is that you are going to use as many recipes. Ultimately, I think people usually find we flip through a book and maybe there are 10 or 15 recipes that really jump out at you that you want to try. Like, having 100 recipes that you want to try is I think unrealistic. I mean, there are some people who cook their way through my books from start to finish, which is really cool.
That's amazing. I wish I had the energy to do that stuff.
Yeah.
So how did living near the shuk, and I've seen your videos, and I know you visit the shuk quite a lot, the shuk of Carmel.
Oh yes.
How has that influence your cuisine, the things that you've been doing recently?
Yeah. I mean, I don't go to the supermarket. The shuk is my supermarket. There aren't even really any supermarkets in my neighborhood. There are makolot, which, mini markets and smaller supermarkets, which are very common in Israel and very well stocked. It's not like going to a 7-Eleven in the States. It's really like a serious market. But But, for me, the shuk is about stories. It's about people who have had 3 or 4 generation businesses. It's about the rhythms of the different holiday calendars, be they Jewish, Muslim, Coptic Christian, whatever, all the different people that work in the shuk and the days that they're not there and why. And, it's a really fascinating place and process. I'm just going to I got to charge my computer. Just hang on one second.
Okay.
So the shuk to me is about stories and the people behind them. And, when I first moved here, I started asking a lot of questions of people. How long have you worked here? What generation is your business? Where are you from? And, I think that they initially were a little bit wary of this American stranger tourist lady until they realized that I actually lived in the neighborhood and started opening up and sharing their immigrant stories and their culinary stories and their shuk stories. And, Sababa, I really had the privilege of telling those stories, and feel like it's extra important because a lot of these businesses are not going to, continue on. These businesses that the grandparents and the parents are, selling paprika, and the grandsons and the great grandsons are, founding high-tech companies and getting PhDs or working in business or traveling around the world. And, I think at least a generation will be skipped in a lot of these businesses. I do think that the younger people are going to start digging deep and, looking at what their ancestors created and want to have a part in it. But like the people who work there are the ones who want their kids to do something different right now. So they're so the shuk is about doing a lot of observing and listening, a lot of smelling and, taking in the scents and seeing what's in season and what's in stock, and looking at the racial background and ethnic background and how diverse the shuk actually is. People from all over the world working there, shopping there, eating there. It's a real microcosm of Israeli society.
It is. So, Israeli society is built with people from different backgrounds that come from different countries. Yeah. Is there a specific cuisine in the Israeli cuisine that draws you to, like, more than the others?
I mean, I'm very attached to Yemenite cooking. My first big assignment as a freelance food writer when I left Gourmet Magazine was writing an article about Yemenite Jewish cooking in Israel for Gourmet. And I got to cook with ladies in Rosh Ayin, which is a traditionally Yemenite, neighborhood near Tel Aviv. And also I live in the Yemenite quarter, like in Tel Aviv. The shuk is in the Yemenite quarter essentially. And it's a very historic neighborhood filled with fascinating people and stories and food culture, a lot based around breads. The Yemenites are known for all their different amazing breads. There's kubana, which is kind of a brioche-like bread that bakes overnight for Shabbat.
A lot of dough.
Also a lot of dough. Yes. China povera, foods of the poor people. Mm-hmm. Yemenites are really geniuses at creating a lot out of a little, especially in the old days in Yemen. And so there's beautiful soups with khawaij, which is a Yemenite spice blend that's kind of like a masala. There are a variety of different breads. And there's obviously srug, which is, my preferred hot sauce, which is a lot of fresh herbs and green chilies, garlic, pepper, some other spices. So I'm really drawn to Yemenite food and culture because of my own experiences and also because of where I live.
Yeah, I come from a Moroccan family.
Ooh,
so
nice.
Yeah, so we have delicious food, but I grew up around Yemen.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're in Israel, so I'm not that lucky at the moment. I don't get to eat their food, but yeah, I grew up around Yemenites. Like my best friend from kindergarten, she's Yemenite, and we grew up eating jachnun and falafel, all these things, malawach and all that. Gotcha. So that was great. How do you balance authenticity with accessibility when adapting the Israeli recipes to home cooks out of Israel?
It's a good question. I try to, first of all, even in the 10 years since I started working on Sababa, basically like the availability of a lot of Israeli staples has really increased. Mm-hmm. Things like silan and pomegranate molasses, date syrup, za'atar, all those things have become more available. And Sababa also was a story about creating those staples so that people could make them at home. There are recipes for labneh, preserved lemon, pomegranate molasses, all the different spice blends, how you can make them if you can't access them. And I guess, I want people to approach Israeli pantry staples as their new essentials and to use them regularly. So, I'm okay encouraging someone to buy something that, they might have to source from a special location, especially because they're going to use it in multiple ways throughout my book. Like, no one likes to buy one ingredient and then have it sit on the shelf for years and pass its expiration date. And really, I just always focused on flavor and what is going to work best in a recipe. And I often give substitutes. If you can't find X, use Y. Something that's a little more accessible to a home cook. I like to view recipes kind of as suggestions as opposed to hard and fast rules. And I love when people adapt my recipes and change them and make them their own and do all kinds of wild things to them.
Yeah, it is some interesting things coming up. But there's a group, an Israeli group of women that, they cook and stuff in the United States. They live in the US, and they always look for, what can I replace this with? Because they have the original recipes from Israel, and sometimes it's hard to find in different places. So it's interesting what they come up with.
Absolutely. Ceylon, you can do part molasses and honey, and pomegranate molasses. You could maybe use a little tamarind and a little bit, it's all kinds of swaps.
Yeah. Is there a family recipe from your mother or grandmother that you still rely on, and what makes it so special?
Many, yeah. I make my grandmother's potato kugel. For a lot of occasions, a very popular recipe in the Shabbat cookbook. It's kind of like a giant oversized latke, very crispy on all sides, creamy, its interior, very salty, eggy, delicious. And I make my mother's overnight chicken soup, which she used to put on the stove on a Thursday night and cook overnight on a very low flame. Cooks all the flavor out of the chicken and the vegetables, and we would eat the chicken and the vegetables with our Shabbat meal. And yeah, just all kinds of, those are like my family staples are very rooted in the Ashkenazi Eastern European kitchen. I'm afraid to take the 23andMe test because I'm pretty sure I'm like 101% Polish. I don't think there's going to be much fun and exciting things to discover there. But I think Ashkenazi cuisine actually, in Israel, Mizrahi cuisine is ascendant, and I'd say the dominant cuisine, which is wonderful because the majority of people who live here are Mizrahi, and in the early years of the state, their culture was overlooked and neglected. And starting in the 70s and 80s, Mizrahi music, Mizrahi culture, Mizrahi style is like really, I would say, what people are aiming to emulate here. But, there are Ashkenazi cooks who are starting to re-examine their roots and kind of update and freshen up and modernize some of the food. You're seeing a big bagel scene all of a sudden in Israel. I think we're going to see more cured meats, like deli kind of meats in the future now that there's better meat available in Israel. And, that's fun for me coming from that background. There's great, all the smoked salmon and all that kind of stuff being made locally as opposed to imported.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, last time I was in Israel, I did not see a lot of those things, but I've seen people recently purchasing more, smoked salmon and bagels, and it's becoming, I think, slowly. Yeah. Israel has been through a pretty rough time, obviously, in the past couple of years, and a lot of people turn to food as comfort. What was your comforting, your most comforting dish that you got to make and eat?
That's a really good question. I mean, my house is like a real mix of American staples and Israeli staples. So, a lot of times, like I'll make, I don't know, like a spicy is tomato soup, maybe with like a grilled cheese using like both a combination of Israeli and American cheeses. I make a lot of really simple things from the shuk, like a whole roasted fish, like with vegetables around it, like for dinner. For breakfast, I eat labneh, like strained yogurt, which is similar to Greek yogurt with Ceylon and dried fruit. And I make a lot of smoothies with tahina and dates. And then for like a big sort of like comforting kind of main course, Yeah, like some kind of a yummy like rice and chicken in one single skillet kind of a thing, because I'm
Mhm.
always looking for easier solutions like the rest of us. And
Yeah.
I love making hameen or cholent in the wintertime, overnight Sabbath cooked stew.
Oh, yeah. The Moroccan khamin is my favorite. It's the best.
Oh yeah, dafina or
The
hameen.
fina, yeah.
Yes.
My grandma
Yeah.
used to make those little balls made out of dough. It's called café de masa. It's like a Spanish Moroccan dish that you would do in the
Right.
summer, and that's always been
Mm.
my favorite
In the
thing
summer?
ever. Yeah, you do it in the summer specifically. It's a lot of work. You know, roll them by hand, like little
Yeah.
dough. So good. So it's like my favorite
Mm.
thing ever growing up.
Lucky
Yeah, I miss
you.
that.
There are all kinds of dumplings. Libyans have kukla, which are sort of torpedo-shaped semolina dumplings made with lamb fat that go in there, like tebecha belsalk, which is a stew that has kind of a reduction of like greens like kale or even spinach that's fried in oil until it gets like really dark and kind of deep green color, and that's used kind of as a condiment and a flavoring. So I love all those kind of stews that are flavorful and also have like great history
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there.
for sure.
Yeah. What is the single most important piece of advice that you would give an aspiring cookbook author?
Um, Try and meet or talk to other writers that you admire, and ask them for advice. You know, try and develop like a very strong voice when you're creating recipes and content these days for social media. But I think really like giving people value with the recipes. Make sure also your recipes are like very well tested and very sound technically, because I really feel like ultimately that's what a cookbook is meant to do, is provide useful, serviceable recipes that you can depend on.
Mhm.
And I always say that, if you write a cookbook and, if you don't like the pictures, if you don't like the writing, if you don't like the design, like that's subjective. But if my recipe fails you when you follow the directions, then I have failed you. So like, I think just really focus on the food at first and get really good at cooking, and, try and like step away from being a generalist, like really find your own niche, find your own way of cooking, find something that distinguishes you from others. Like we don't need another classic pasta primavera recipe. Like we
Right.
want your take on that. We want to know why yours is different. How were you influenced by it? Is there a story behind it? Is there a tweak that you made to the recipe? Is there something you can add to innovate technically? Or that's what those are and also just read a lot of other cookbooks, and also read a lot of books, because like I said, like these days, like cookbooks are like books, and you need to be able to write nicely as well.
Yes. Be inspired. That's
Yeah, be
yeah.
inspired and inspiring.
So speaking of inspiration, what other Jewish or Israeli cookbook authors inspire you?
My friend Michael Solomonov in Philadelphia,
Mm.
his restaurants, I think, are really like the gold standard of like modern Israeli cooking in the United States. And his cookbooks are also beautiful explorations of his own history and Israeli culture. Wow, there are lots. Whose books have come out? My friend Leah Koenig, who is sort of a younger version of, I would say, Joe Nathan, who's kind of the grand dame or the queen of Jewish cooking. Leah writes she wrote a beautiful book about Roman cooking called Portico Roman Jewish cooking, that came out a couple of years ago. I like younger authors like Jay Cohen, who has a huge following on TikTok and is
Yeah,
very
he's great.
tapped into what younger people are doing. And also my friend Micah Siba, who's vegetarian and wrote a really great vegetarian cookbook called Nosh. I like to keep up with what the youngins are doing. And of course the classics, Joe Nathan, and Gil Marks, who was a scholar / cook who wrote a lot of resources and like sort of encyclopedic books about Jewish cooking that a lot of us refer to.
All right. Well, I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I just wanted to make sure that I talk about your new book. You just announced that you have a new book coming
Yeah.
out in the spring. It's called Zariz, which is quick.
Called Zariz, which
Yeah.
is quick.
Yeah. So what can you tell us about it, and where can people pre-order it?
Well, I wrote it during the war. After October 7th, I was on book tour for my Shabbat cookbook, and I came back to Israel, and I was feeling pretty down in the dumps, and I realized that like I needed simpler cooking in complicated times. Like I wanted really flavorful, good food that had a lot of impact, but maybe a few less steps or a few less dishes, and I didn't have the headspace that I normally have. And my cooking in general is veering towards the more simple in certain ways. So it's 100 recipes, each fits on one page and has a photo next to it. They each have most of the recipes only have 10 or 11 ingredients, which really isn't a lot. It might sound like a lot, but it's really not. It's a little bit, it's a fun and joyful book, which is funny considering when it was written, but I think I was really seeking that outlet, and I think it comes through in the book. The recipes are very energetic and helpful and useful for home cooks. And I always say Israeli food is about sun and spice, lots of citrus and chilies, and there's a lot of that in this book.
That's great.
And you can pre-order it
Yes.
anywhere the books are sold. Kitchen Arts and Letters in New York, you can pre-order signed copies online, which is exciting. And all of the usual suspects, the larger retailers online have it, and you can pre-order it anywhere, Amazon. But it's nice to support independent bookstores in your city, and they'll all have it available. And Kitchen Arts and Letters has signed copies.
Okay, that's great. Well, Adeena, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking
Thank
to you.
Really
And thank
nice.
you all for listening. Until next time.